Hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to be looking at Act 4, Scene 3 of Othello. And we're almost at the end of the play, and you can see here in terms of our plot map, we've reached this yellow circle where I've put a willow tree here. And the reason why I've chosen this image is that this scene that we're going to look at today is often described as being the willow scene. At the centre of the scene is a song that Desdemona sings that she's picked up from a former servant, and we'll look at that in a couple of minutes. And that song is the willow song, and of course we've got all of these ideas of the weeping willow, and willows being associated with sadness. And so the point of today's scene is to increase the level of pathos that we feel for Desdemona just before we see her murder in Act. So our big question, and we've been thinking about this particular question when looking at the previous scene as well, and so we'll continue with this. It's how does Shakespeare present the patriarchal society? So we're going to look at unpacking that in terms of the impact that the patriarchy has on individual women, but also a little bit about the impact that it has on men as well. Now, one of the things that you need to do when you're studying A-level English literature is start to engage with the critical material that's out there about the text that you're looking at. And by critical material, I mean literary critics, so people who have read a lot, who've studied a lot, who are trained to write essays about texts. And they put forward their opinions, and then doing so engage in a debate about how we might interpret the text. Now, I've got an opinion here from a poet called S.T. Coleridge, who was writing in the 19th century. And Coleridge argues that Desdemona is almost sanctified in our eyes by her absolute unsuspiciousness and holy entireness of love. Now, Coleridge is using very heavenly language here. The word sanctified means that someone's made pure, almost saintly, and we've got that adjective there as well, the holy entireness of her love. So Coleridge is really emphasizing how pure Desdemona is, and how if the audience or the viewer was a religious person, that they might see her in those religious Christian terms as well. But as well as that, Coleridge argues that she has absolute unsuspiciousness, that she doesn't doubt her husband in any way at all, that there's no worry in her about the fact that she should remain married to Othello. He also talks about the entireness of her love, that it seems to be all-consuming for her. And we see this in Act 5 when Desdemona is murdered. There's a moment where she briefly wakes up again to make sure that everybody knows that it's not Othello's fault, that it's her fault. And so she really emphasises how completely and utterly she loves her husband. Then we've got a more modern critic here, Marilyn French, who argues that Desdemona ultimately accepts her culture's dictum that she must be obedient to males. Now, we've talked in the previous videos about the patriarchy and how female obedience was expected in the culture of the time. And what we're going to see today is that Desdemona accepts this. Of course, the person who doesn't accept this is the character of Emilia, who we're going to look at as well today. So at the start of Act 4, Scene 3, Othello commands Desdemona to go to bed and says, "Wait for me there." And so Othello leaves, and Desdemona starts to get ready for bed, and Emilia, her servant, is helping her. So Desdemona says, "Give me my nightly wearing and adieu. We must not now displease him." Now, this is a very important line. Desdemona is becoming increasingly submissive to Othello, and she can't see any situation in which she could disagree with her husband. So this really bears out what Marilyn French was arguing about, how she completely accepts her culture's dictum about obedience to males. And then Emilia says, "Would that you had never seen him. I wish that you'd never married this man." But Desdemona disagrees. She says, "My love doth so approve him, so my love is so great, that even his stubbornness," so his bad qualities she's talking about here, his checks, so when he tells me off or when he's annoyed with me, his frowns, so when he's upset with me, everything about him have grace and favour. So what she's saying here is that she's so in love with him, she doesn't mind how bad-tempered Othello is, how angry he is with her, that she still reveres him and puts him on a pedestal. And this little line, "Prithee unpin me," is Desdemona asking Emilia to help her get undressed. Obviously the dresses at the time would have been very complicated and difficult to get out of on your own. Now, that might seem like a throwaway comment, but the juxtaposition between Desdemona asserting her complete and utter love to Othello, who betrays her, at the same time as engaging with the servant who is going to really stand up for her in Act 5 is really interesting. And this little detail reminds us that actually the closest relationship that Desdemona has is with another woman, is with her female servant. And so we have this image here of the two women kind of standing, maybe not standing up against the patriarchy, but standing, attempting to survive in a patriarchal world. The staging of this scene is relevant here as well. So previously, we've mostly seen Desdemona in public spaces. So in the sagittary or outside, or talking to Othello in the courtrooms and things like that. But here we've got a very intimate scene in the bedroom. And this is the greatest level of intimacy that we see between Desdemona and any other character. So it's quite interesting that actually Shakespeare is showing us that maybe friendship is actually a stronger force than romantic love. And then Emilia says, "I've laid those sheets, the wedding sheets you bade me, on the bed." And Desdemona says, "If I do die before thee, prithee shroud me in one of these same sheets." Now the shroud is the cloth that you would wrap a dead body in. So Desdemona almost has a premonition here of what's going to happen that night, that she's going to die on those wedding sheets. And she gives Emilia the instruction just to wrap her up in that sheet. Now, on the one hand, Desdemona sees the wedding sheets as being a symbol of that undying love that she has for Othello. On the other hand, it's her trying to get back to the joy and the happiness that she initially shared with Othello when they first got married. It's also interesting here that Desdemona doesn't make any attempt to escape her fate. She seems to be quite aware of what that fate is going to be, yet she doesn't try to run away, even though she previously ran away from her father's house in Venice, and we know that she has the determination that would enable her to do that. She doesn't attempt to do that here. And that might be because the only option available to her would be the situation that we see Bianca in, prostituting herself. So it's possible that Desdemona doesn't want to get herself into that situation. You know, as a married woman who's run away from her husband, that would probably be the only option for her financially. And because she is so virtuous and so holy and so sanctified, Desdemona can't even see herself as putting herself in that position. So she submits to the death that she knows is probably going to happen pretty soon. And then Desdemona says, "My mother had a maid called Barbary." Now this little speech echoes the speech that Othello made about his mother giving him something, and his mother gave him the handkerchief, which was supposed to symbolise love and now symbolises betrayal. Desdemona's mother's maid gives her a song, which again should symbolise love, but actually has that major theme of betrayal in it as well. And so this maid called Barbary, who passes down the song, was in love, and he she loved proved mad and did forsake her. So it echoes Desdemona's situation. Now Shakespeare has changed the details here from the original version to make it fit his story a bit more appropriately. And so the song that Desdemona has taken up from Barbary is the song of a willow, so that's why it's called the willow scene. And an old thing it was, but it expressed her fortune, and she died singing it. That song tonight will not go from my mind. I have much to do but to go hang my head all at one side and sing it like poor Barbary. So Desdemona is just going to sit there in a very sad position with very unfortunate body language, and she's going to sing this song recalling the maid and her difficult situation. So all of this is trying to increase the pathos that we feel and to increase the sense of Desdemona's innocence. And the more innocent Desdemona appears, the more villainous Iago appears, and the more blind to the truth Othello appears. So the function of this scene is to really highlight those aspects of tragedy that we've discussed elsewhere in the play. Shakespeare, to go back to our big question, Shakespeare is also showing the impact of the patriarchal society on the individual. So here we see a woman who's been psychologically and physically beaten by her husband, and who is in such a state of despair that she can't even think of a way to get herself out of this situation. So we see the real human detrimental effect of male dominance. Then Emilia's trying to cheer Desdemona up a little bit, and so she makes a rather inappropriate comment about Ludovico. And then Desdemona says, "Dost thou in conscience think, tell me, Emilia, that there be women who do abuse their husbands in such gross kind?" So very innocently, very naively, Desdemona is asking, are there women who would have an affair, who would betray their husband like that? And Emilia says, of course. And Desdemona, again, innocent, "Would thou do such a deed for all the world? Would you do it? Even if you gained the whole world?" And Emilia says, "Wouldn't you?" And Desdemona says, "No, by this heavenly light." So again, it's the pathos, it's the innocence, it's the naivety of this young woman who's grown up in a very protected culture and who's now been plunged into this chaotic situation in Cyprus with a man that she's starting to realise that she doesn't know very well. Interestingly, she's using heavenly imagery here, whereas we've seen that Othello and Iago use imagery of hell. And Emilia takes Desdemona's words and is making a joke out of this. She says, "Oh, I wouldn't do it either in the daylight, but I would do it in the dark." So Emilia is approaching this in a way that she's trying to cheer her mistress up, but also to articulate quite a cynical view of marriage and of love, and a more worldly wise view, I suppose. And Emilia says that the world's a huge thing, is a great price for a small vice. So Emilia's saying, of course, if I got a huge amount of money, power, respect, if I was able to elevate my husband in the social hierarchy, then it would be a very small thing to do in order to get such positive returns. So Emilia sees this in a very practical sense. So notice the juxtaposition between the two women here, and how Emilia is becoming more confident in putting forward her cynical ideas. So then after that, Emilia warms to her theme a little bit, and we have quite a feminist diatribe. So we'll look at it in a second, but I just want to qualify the idea that this is feminist first by talking a little bit more about the staging of the scene. So I've mentioned that it's an intimate scene between these two women who are very good friends now, and they are in a bedroom in private. Now, if this was a truly feminist diatribe, we would expect it to be spoken in public with men there. But Emilia doesn't seem to feel comfortable enough to do that. Her transformation into this feminist icon that we see in Act 5 hasn't completely happened. So she's giving this speech, which has some very controversial content, but she gives it in the safety and the privacy of the bedroom. So there are still limits on Emilia's articulation of her personal beliefs here. And she starts off by saying, "I do think it is their husband's fault if wives do fall. It's the husband's fault if the wife has an affair." Now that's controversial. And then she says, "Say that they, the husband, slacken their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps." So if the husband doesn't fulfill his husbandly duty, if he doesn't look after his wife, if he doesn't provide her with financial security, if he pours his treasures, if he gives everything to his mistress, then it's the husband's fault. Of course the wife is going to have an affair, Emilia is saying. And then she says, if the husband breaks out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us. So if the husband is irrationally angry, or if he restrains his wife so he prevents her from going outside perhaps, or from having the friends that she would choose, then she says, if they strike us, so if there's physical abuse, or scant our former having in despite why we have goals. So Emilia here is listing all of the different negative behaviours that a husband might show towards his wife in a patriarchal society. We've seen all of this between Desdemona and Othello. We've seen him strike her. We've seen him saying that she needs to stay inside more. She shouldn't be so social. And this would have been relatively common in Shakespeare's time, and husbands would have felt that it's okay to act like this. And what Emilia is saying is that this is not how marriage should be. This is not how a husband should behave towards their wife. So she says, let husbands know their wives have sense like them. So by sense, she means physical senses. So they see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. So what Emilia is saying here is that if a husband doesn't fulfill his wife in every possible way, including in the bedroom, that women have physical needs as well, and that they're going to start to look elsewhere to provide for those physical needs. So Emilia says, what is it the husbands do when they change us for others? So what is a husband doing if they are ignoring their wife and changing them to have an affair with someone else? Is it sport? So is it for fun? I think it is. Doth affection breed it? So is there a sense of love or infatuation there? Yeah, I think there is. Is it frailty? That's ours. So is it a weakness in humankind? It is so too. But don't we have affections? Don't we feel love? Don't we want to have fun? Don't we have weaknesses as men have? So what Emilia is saying here is that women are equal to men in many ways. They have exactly the same human characteristics as men. Now, this is groundbreaking. This is revolutionary to say that women can feel this as well. There's a real sense before the 20th century that women didn't have much sexual desire, that the desire was all on the men's part. But what Emilia is saying here is that actually that desire is clear, that women do have that. Notice her use of pronouns as well. I love a good pronoun. She's talking about them and us, and she's seeing a very clear separation between men and women as well. So then she concludes by saying, then let them use us well. So let them treat us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us. So if a husband doesn't treat us well, then we will have affairs too, and we'll betray our husbands. Notice that that's a couplet at the end, so no and so rhyme. So it seems like Emilia is giving a proverb or some received wisdom to Desdemona. She's trying to help Desdemona to understand Othello's behaviour and to understand how to react in a more proactive way. So Emilia is really trying to help Desdemona here at this point. Okay, so going back to the critical quotations that we started with, I want you to break them down and think, is there evidence from the play to support this particular argument? And is there any evidence in the play that might help me disagree with this argument? Because when you take a critical opinion, you shouldn't just accept it completely, but you should interrogate it, you should look at the evidence, you should see whether you are justified in agreeing with that person or disagreeing with them. And in that way, you're engaging in literary criticism and you're engaging in the worldwide conversation about these texts. So thanks for listening, and we will move on to Act 5 in the next video.